This video is an overview of the Southbend lathe in the student machine shop at the University of North Dakota. I'm just going to talk about the different parts and pieces of the machine and give you an idea of the vocabulary. So we're going to start on this end of the machine with the tailstock. The tailstock can be moved anywhere along the axes of the ways of the machine by loosening up this nut, and it can be locked down onto the ways by tightening up this nut right here. May have to give it a couple of turns. That'll lock it into position. There we go. Now it's no longer able to scooch back and forth. The tailstock can also advance its own quill back and forth. And this device here is a tailstock piece. And for turning something between centers, meaning that it's a really long piece of work, needs to be supported on both ends, we can use a device like this, put in here. And how we can change things out of the tailstock is to simply advance or retract the quill all the way backwards. It slides out, and we can go from that center into a drill chuck. So we can just push this forward a little bit, lock it in place, and the taper is all that holds it in position, and it's locked in pretty decently. So now we can use this to drill a hole in the end of the stock, something like that. This is the lever nut that will lock the tailstock quill in place, and now we cannot move it forwards and backwards. Next up in the lathe is our slide assembly here. This handle will advance the Z-axes of the lathe forwards and backwards along the ways. This here is called the the cross slide. This is called the cross slide, and this one, it's basically at a cross, a plus or a 90-degree angle to the Z-axis of the lathe. And then this is called the top slide, and it can be scooched back and forth as well. Note that on the top slide and the cross slide, there are numbers, and in this model, those are listed in thousandths of an inch. So if we advance this from 30 to 40, that would move this in 10 thousandths of an inch, and it would take basically 20 thousandths off of the diameter of this material. On the top of this, we have mounted a quick change tool post. And to swap out the cutters from one type to another, we push that lever forward, and it loosens up the dovetail, and we can remove the tooling. This one might be used for turning and facing operations, and other varieties may be used for cutting threads. And to swap them out between them, we basically put it through the dovetails, clamp it in position. I'll go back to the turning variety right here. So that's the quick change tool post. Now, the thing over here is called a chuck. And this is what we use to hold our work in position on the lathe. This is called the key for the chuck. Put it into this hole and loosen it up by turning it to the left. We can take our stock in and out of the chuck. This is a 3-jaw variety, so it will self-center kind of the material. Generally, if we don't want to have more than about 4 times the diameter of the material sticking out of the chuck, otherwise it doesn't get supported very well. We'll get some chatter. So that's when we would turn it between centers and support it on the other end with one of those live centers. So the only other thing I want to make sure to mention about this is never ever leave the key inside the chuck. It becomes a projectile, and when it spins, it will throw this across the room, and that's not good. So always remove this chuck key even when the machine is sitting idle, because you never know when the next time somebody comes up to it and turns it on, oh, there is a chuck key in there, and now it's flung across the room. So that's bad news. Let's talk about safety on this machine a little bit. This is a big rotating mass, and so when you're operating the lathe, you want to be very conscious about where your hands are relative to this chuck and where your clothing and what are relative to the lead screw that's located down here. Notice that those are both spinning members. Okay, it's not spinning now because I don't have the gear engaged, but if I engage the gear, that is spinning down there, and that's a safety hazard for sure. Any loose clothing can get caught on this and start to wrap up around that lead screw and then drawing your person closer and closer into the machine. That's bad news. So always be conscious of any loose clothing, anything that could potentially get caught on that lead screw, anything that could come in contact with the chuck. That is bad news. So please keep that in mind as you're operating. And this is a machine that requires 100% of your attention focused on it. A couple other parts on here. There's another video I'll talk about how to change the RPMs by swapping out the belt speeds. This will engage and disengage the lead screw and basically puts it into a neutral position in which the lead screw is not spinning. It puts it into a reverse position for that lead screw. That you see it's spinning backwards, and then by flipping it, now you see it's spinning the other direction. Other parts worth mentioning on this machine would be the gear change box over here that basically can set the number of threads per inch or travel of the slide relative to the RPMs of the lathe. Talk a lot more about this box when we get into threading operations. And it can also advance the lathe carriages forwards and backwards. So let's take a peek at that for just a little bit. When it's spinning, the lead screw is going. We can engage this little lever down here. It's a little harder to see in that video. But if I tighten that up, you'll notice that now the slide is moving at a very slow rate, and it's sliding in this direction. We can just loosen up that clutch and it stops spinning. We can change that up and engage the top slide as well, the cross slide, by moving this lever to its down position here. When that's in that position, now the top slide is engaged, albeit it's driving it backwards, but we can change that by reversing the direction of the lead screw. All right, so a couple levers that we'll get used to as we do different operations on the machine. So that's a general overview of the machine. We'll have future videos here talking about some of the other features and getting into the operations and how we actually use the machine.